So just before I start, I think at least some of you have already worked with panel data on STATA, macro or micro, but I was just wondering whether anyone has already worked with labor force surveys, or that's the first time. So can you please raise your hand if you have already worked with labor force surveys or the Egyptian one? So Noha did. Someone else? Anmar, okay. So the majority, as far as I can see, did not. Okay, no problem, because I mean, this will also, we'll try to go through the structure of labor force surveys and how we can work with them on STATA and in a panel framework. Okay. So the program of today, we're going first to have a general introduction, then static panels, the difference between static and dynamic panels. We will not cover all the details of the dynamic panels because we'll not have time, and they are a bit more relevant for macro analysis more than micro analysis. For static panel models, we will just go through the different models that we can use and how we choose between them. And I think you might be familiar with this, but just again, to make sure that we understand the theory behind the empirical part that we will be working on. And we will start with the STATA application. And as I said yesterday, Ramaj will share with you at the end of the training workshop a folder that includes 3 subfolders, the slides, the do files, and the data sets, in addition to some additional readings, especially that there is a very good book called Applied Micro-econometrics by Cameron, and it's one of the best, it's like the Bible of applied microeconometrics in the empirical work. Okay, you will see it also among the reading list that was already sent to you. And I think also you will be able to find a version of this book or ebook online. So just to remind you, yesterday we were talking about the problem of orthogonality and how we can overcome this problem, either based on the conditional exogeneity of placement or based on the exogeneity of the instrument itself. And we said that we were going mainly to cover the points related to the conditional exogeneity of placement, especially 3 methods, which are the panel, difference in difference, and PSM. So when it comes to the panel model, as we have seen yesterday, in general, if we have one individual and a time dimension that is greater than 1, this means that we are following the same individual over time. So we have a time series analysis. If we have t that is equal to 1, but n that is greater than 1, it's a cross section. And then if we have a t that is greater than 1 and n that is greater than 1, it's a panel. But if t is greater than n, it will be a panel time series. And if n is greater than t, it will be a classic panel analysis, whether it's static or dynamic, right? Our main focus will be mainly on the third point, where t is greater than 1, n is greater than 1, but n is greater than t. This is very important because we'll be working with microeconomic data, either firms or household or individuals. In general, we have thousands or hundreds of individuals, right? And this is clearly much more than what we observe in terms of the time dimension. So that's for the panel. How does a panel look like? In general, what happens is that we observe the same individual for different variables over time. And that's what you can see here. We have individual 1, individual 2, until individual n. So in our case, let's say we're going to have 3,000 individuals or 3,000 households or 3,000 firms that are observed in different waves. Wave 1, wave 2, wave 3. In the Egyptian case, the data that we will be using we have the Egyptian labor market panel that is starts in 1988, 1998, 2006, 12, 18, and 2023. Even if the data of 1988 is not part of the panel, but for the 5 other rounds, they constitute a panel. So that's the data structure that we will be working on. And here, all those X's, they represent 1, 2, and K, they represent different variables. So age, gender, occupation, wages, and so on. Okay? And clearly, the advantage of these models is that they help us, as we will see later, take into consideration the unobserved heterogeneity that we have in the data. And this clearly can be a source of bias in our estimations, as we have seen yesterday, either because of the simultaneity bias, or the endogeneity, or the unobservability, or the incompleteness of the model. So the idea here is to introduce some measures that help us control for those unobservables in order to reduce the bias that we have in the estimation, or to eliminate completely this bias, depending on what we will see later. The difference between the two models will be mainly how we treat the error term itself, right? And that's why if we look at the different combinations of slopes and intercepts, we will see that here in this case, so here in this case, this is the classical case where we have constant slope and constant intercept, in the sense that all individuals they have the same intercept, so that does not depend on the value of the different variables, and they have also the same slope, in the sense that the effect of the variable on the dependent variable is identical for everyone. So this is the classical case where we have constant slope and constant intercept. However, we have different combinations, because we can have a different intercept but a constant slope. And here, that's the case of what we will call later the fixed effect model, the one that is surrounded with the red circle here. So here, for the fixed effect model, what does it mean? It means that each individual will have his own or her own intercept, right? But all the lines here are parallel. And as they are parallel, this means that they are, we have the same slope. So in other words, for instance, age will affect or experience will affect wages the same for all individuals, but all individuals, each individual, sorry, will have his or her own intercept. And that's the case of the fixed effects, as we will see it later. So basically, the idea here is that I will assume that all the variables will have the same slope, but given that they have different characteristics or some unobservables over time, we'll assume that they have, each one has his or her own intercept, okay? The other two cases where we have different slopes and different intercepts, which is the case here with the circle in green. Here in this case, each individual has his or her own slope and his or her own intercept. So this basically means that I'm running a regression for each individual to avoid, which means in this case that the variable can affect, for instance, Mejri in a different way than Riham. And in this case, I don't assume that the variable will affect all individuals the same way. And also, each individual has his or her own intercept. The final case, which is very unlikely to happen, is the case where we have varying slopes but constant intercepts, in the sense that each individual will be affected differently, but all individuals will depart from the same point. And this is very unlikely to occur because what matters for us is the unobservable, is whether we control for the unobservables that we have, which means that in this case we need really to control for the different intercepts much more than the different slopes. That's why the fourth case is very unlikely to happen. Okay. So in a nutshell, what we'll be working on now is the first case, which is the fixed effects model. Bearing in mind that in this case, we assume that we have the same slope of the phenomenon we're interested in, but they will have different intercepts. Okay? Why the unobserved heterogeneity in the case here where we control for each intercept is important? Because actually the unobserved heterogeneity can lead to an omitted variable bias in the sense that if some unobservables are omitted from the model, this means that the model is not well specified. And if it's not well specified, the estimates will be biased. That's one. Two, some unobservables are not, they are difficult to measure and they are intrinsic to the individual. For instance, I cannot measure the enthusiasm of Ghana because it's a variable that is difficult to measure, but it's related to the personality of Ghana. I cannot measure, even if I can measure the IQ of Noha, but I will still be not fully able to measure her overall skills. So that's why I want to control for any variable that I'm not able to measure, and that I want to control for through those fixed effects. Okay. And that's why in this case, the problem is that if I don't consider all those fixed effects, in this case, they might affect my variable of interest, and which means that they will be correlated with the observed covariates, and in this which means that if I don't consider this, they will be included in the error term, which will make the error term correlated with the the independent variables, which will violate the orthogonality assumption, right? So that's why I have to consider this and to exclude all those variables that affect the error term from the error term to reduce the problem of orthogonality. Okay? Any question on this part before I proceed? All is clear? Okay. So that's why you want to work with the panel in order to control for those unobservables. However, even if working with panel models is ideal, but it also suffers from some problems in the sense that clearly, especially in the in the macro case, it's not an important problem, but in the micro case, it's a very important problem, which is the problem of attrition. And by this, I mean that in the case of panel data sets, some individuals at the household level or some firms at the firm level might refuse to participate in the second wave or the third wave of the survey, which means in this case, I will have a problem of attrition in the sense that some individuals will withdraw from my sample and I will not be able to follow them over time. And if I'm not able to follow them over time, I'll not be able to have a panel, right? So that's why this might oblige us to work with the pooled version of the data. And as I said yesterday, for those who are working with the World Bank Enterprise Survey, in general, it's more convenient to work with the pooled version because we are not really able to work with the panel one. Okay? So that's just the general introduction on the idea of what we want to do and how we're going to do it through the panel analysis to reduce this problem of unobserved heterogeneity and therefore to address the problem of non-orthogonality. Okay, now we move to the second part where we will see the fixed and random effects and how we choose between them in general. Okay, so this is the general form. We have a variable, dependent variable y, that is observed for individual I in time t. And it depends on several, I mean, this variable is regressed on or depends on several independent variables, x, observed also for individual I in year t. Then we have the error term, VIT. We have some year dummies, lambda t, and individual dummies, mu I. And in general, in the classical way we do things, those three terms, mu, lambda, and v, they are part of or they are included in the error term, right? So that's why if I fail to consider those fixed effects, the error term, which is UIT, will include other effects that might be correlated with the individual, with the covariates or with the explanatory variables, and which will lead to a correlation between the error term and the explanatory variables, which again violates the condition of orthogonality. Okay, so that's the problem of working with if I have a panel data where I don't consider the panel dimension in my regression. In other words, again, because this is very important, in this case, if I have a panel data where I observe different individuals over time, where I don't observe where I observe individuals over time, and if I don't consider this in my empirical analysis, I'm going to have all the unobservables, especially at the individual level, that are included in the error term. And if I don't consider this, this will make, because here the error term includes both mu and v, right? And mu I it's an individual fixed effect. It might be correlated with the x, which will make u and x correlate, and therefore it violates the condition of orthogonality. Okay. Is this point clear? Any questions? Anything that's not clear? If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send in the chat box. Okay. So clearly, if we use an OLS estimation, bearing in mind that the orthogonality assumption is not verified, our estimates will be biased. So just to remind you, yesterday what we have seen, that we need several conditions to be verified, like the linearity with respect to the independent variables, then the exogeneity in the sense that the expected value of the disturbance is zero, and the correlate and the covariance between the explanatory variables and the error term is also equal to zero. The errors are independently and identically distributed. They have a constant variance, homoscedasticity. They also have they are not. We don't have autocorrelation, so the errors are not correlated. And the variables are independent. The independent variables, sorry, are non-stochastic. The x's themselves. Okay. So those are in general the assumptions that we have briefly seen yesterday, and that you have definitely also seen several times. However, the main issue here is that if I don't consider the panel dimension of my database, this assumption will be violated. And if this assumption is violated, we're going to have biased estimators. Okay. That's why econometrically, two solutions have been proposed in order to address this issue of non or the violation of the violation of orthogonality or the existence of non-orthogonality, which are defects and the random effects. So basically, what we do in the fixed and random effects is I'm going to write the initial model differently. I remind you that in the initial model, I had an individual component and the error term, right? So what I will do in this case, I will take out from the error term the individual component, and I will add it with the intercept of the model. And this will create the random effect, right? So as you can see here, what we've done is that we've taken the UI, which is the individual effect, right? And I merge it with the intercept. So this will make the intercept varying. Okay? And then in addition to the error term and the explanatory variable. So that's for the fixed effects. And that's why in this case, we were going to have what we have seen in the previous slide, where each individual will have his or her own intercept, because what will make those different intercepts is that we have alpha plus UI1, alpha plus U2, and so on and so forth. However, here we have only one beta. That's why the slope here will be for every one beta, right? So here, what I've done, I've taken the UI and merged it with the intercept, okay? However, if I don't do this, but I will keep the UI part of the error term, which is the one that we have here, in this case, the error term will stay as it is, UI, but plus the traditional error term, mu I t, right? So, but in order to have a sound and an unbiased estimation, we need to assume that the error term here, in this case, is not correlated with my axis. So that's why at the end of the day, the fixed effects will rely on some individual dummies that I will introduce in order to have different intercepts. But the random effects, it's basically an OLS, slightly revised with some assumptions, okay? So that's in a nutshell, the rationale of fixed effects and random effects, okay? Clearly, the most important thing in the random effects is that we have to make sure that we are still able to assume that the random error is uncorrelated with the covariates in order to make sure that we are not violating the assumption of exogeneity. Okay? So that's for just the general introduction of the fixed and the random effects and how they are treated. Okay? What we will do now is to first see the fixed effects model, then see the random effects model and how we choose between them conceptually speaking, and then we move to the STATA application. So in the fixed effects model, clearly, we allow for the different intercepts to differ. And as I have shown you in the previous graph, which is also you can see here on this graph, is that in this case, instead of having one fitted line for all the individuals, I will have a fitted line with a different intercept, alpha 1 and alpha 2, for each individual. But again, the two individuals, they have the same slope that show the impact of X on Y, okay? And if I don't consider this, this will make my initial, let's say if I write the equation differently, so it will be, so my first equation is alpha 0 plus let's say gamma xi t, right? Here, the gamma compared to beta and compared to this beta as well will be biased. Why? Muhammad, did you please Muhammad, تقدر فهيم
Et on considère que toutes les informations peuvent être utiles pour estimer.
Muhammad, can you please mute yourself?
La bonne humeur de la population. C'était bien qu'une population de bonne humeur, attention.
So in this case, the gamma will be biased compared to the betas, and that's why I want to distinguish between them by introducing a different fixed effect, right? So in this case, beta will not be biased like the gamma that does not distinguish between the different intercepts. So just a second. Okay. So that's why in this case,
Dr. Shahir?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry for interruption, but can we go back to the same graph?
Yes.
I didn't get the model that we used gamma in it. So can we please repeat this again?
Yes. So here,
Thank you so much.
Here we have, let's say, yi that is also conditional on x, right? Which is equal to, let's say, alpha 0, just to distinguish it from the two models that we have, and gamma xit, right? So what is this model? It's basically this one. Why this one? Because here I just have one intercept, which will be, let's say, alpha 0, but here it's a bit different. I mean, I can't make it here on the graph, but in general, the alpha 0 corresponds to the intercept of this line, and the gamma is the slope, correct?
Yes.
So here, the problem is that when I compare the gamma to the beta, which is the intercept once I control for the individual fixed effects, the gamma is biased. Why it's biased? Because it does not take into consideration the structure of the panel that we have, according to which all, for instance, the red dots, they correspond to Safiya, and all the blue dots, they correspond to Riham. So I have to consider the fact that Riham has her own points here, Safiya has her own points here, and I'm not estimating just an overall biased effect which corresponds to the gamma.
Yes, I got it. Thank you so much.
So that's the rationale of the econometric rationale of introducing the fixed effects. So again, this does not mean that I'm going to estimate a different effect for Riham or a different effect for Safiya, but I'm just assuming that Riham will start in alpha 1, Safiya will start in alpha 2. Their observations will be around their intercept, but both of them will have the same slope. So in this case, the experience in general will have the same effect on Safiya's wage and Riham's wage. Okay? So that's for the fixed effect model. Clearly, for the fixed effect model, the most important point is that we are assuming that what matters here are the individual specific intercept that might be correlated with one or more regressors, and therefore, if I introduce them explicitly in the regression, I will reduce this bias. So basically, I'm saying that perhaps the motivation of Safiya is difficult to measure. So and perhaps the motivation of Safiya is correlated to her experience because she is motivated. Therefore, she has a long experience. So I will isolate this motivation by including a dummy variable. Okay? And if I include this dummy variable that takes the value of 1 if the individual is Safiya and 0 otherwise, another dummy variable that takes the value of 1 if the individual is Mejri and 0 otherwise, a third variable for Rihan that takes the value of 1 and 0 otherwise, and so on and so forth. So if I have 10 individuals, I will introduce in my model 9 dummy variables, right? And this will reduce the part that was included in the error term. So is the general rationale of fixed effects clear? Any questions or anything that's not clear? Any questions? Okay. Now we move to the second one. So here, basically, the advantage of this method is that we introduce basically dummy variables, as I said, and that's why we call the fixed effects the least square dummy variable, because I'm basically estimating a least square model like the OLS, but in addition to the OLS, I'm introducing in it dummy variables for each individual that will lead to different intercepts and therefore a lower bias. However, the alternative is not, sorry, in this case, will be to not introducing those dummy variables, but to run a random effect model. And in the case of the random effect, as I said in the beginning, it's a modified OLS because we still have the assumption that the correlation between the error term and the explanatory variable is low, but at the same time, we have to run something that is a bit similar to the OLS, which is the GLS, or the generalized least squares, that I will also remind you of that. So if we assume that in the case of the fixed effects model, we have a non-stochastic component that will be taken out of the error term, and therefore I'm going to include dummy variables in my model to control for this. The other alternative is that the unobservables are stochastic or random. And in this case, if they are stochastic or random, this means that I have to use a model that takes into consideration the fact that my unobservables are not I mean, they are stochastic, or they are not deterministic like in the fixed effects model. And the model that can handle this is the random effect model. So in this case, the idea is that I'm going to have more or less in the random effect model a value for the intercept of the individual unit that follows a random drawing from a larger population. So in other words, in this case, I'm going to assume that what distinguish the individual is not the different intercept that I have, but in this case, the intercept value itself follows this random drawing from the population. And that's why in this case, the random effects model might be especially interesting in at least 2 cases, because if I have some time invariant variables that matter for me, like gender, for instance, if I introduce fixed effects, they will be dropped. Why? Because back to our example, if I'm interested in the impact of education on wages or the experience on wages, so back to our 2 economists, Safiya and Riham. Safiya, when did you defend your PhD?
In November 2022.
2022.
Yes.
And Riham, when did you defend your PhD?
In 2016.
2016. So this means that Riham has 9 years of experience so far, and Safia has 3 years of experience, right? So if I want to examine the impact of experience on wages, I expect that Riham is going to have a higher wage than Safia because Riham has a higher number of years of experience compared to Safia. But at the same time, I will assume that Mejri defended also his PhD 9 years ago, right? So Mejri and Riham, they have the same number of years of experience. However, the main difference between Mejri and Riham is that Mejri is a male and Riham is a female. And they want to measure to what extent Riham is facing a discrimination on the labor market, given that we know that in general, women, they might face a discrimination in the labor market. The problem here is that if I want to introduce a gender variable in my regression that will take the value of 1 if the individual is a woman and 0 otherwise, this variable will take the value of 1 for Riham and 0 for Mejri, right? But if I introduce a dummy variable for each individual in order to run a fixed effect model, all the time invariant variables, so the variables that don't change over time, will be dropped. Why? Because they will be fully captured by the fixed effects. So in this case, I will not be able to introduce the time invariant variables, so I will not be able to examine the impact of gender on wages because the gender variable will be captured by the fixed effects, right? So that's why choosing, even if the fixed, in general, we do prefer running models with fixed effects. But the problem is that if I have some time invariant variables like the gender, like the location, if I assume that Riham didn't move from her place or from her governorate during her whole life, and Mejri as well. So the variable of location will be time invariant. It will be captured by Mejri's fixed effect and by Riham fixed effect. So all the time invariant variables will be automatically kept by or measured by the fixed effects, right? So that's why the advantage of the random effects model is that in general, it can help us introduce in our model time invariant variables. So the variables that do not change over time, okay? That's the first advantage of the random effect model. The second advantage in the random effect model is that it's more economical in terms of the degrees of freedom. Why? Because if I have a model, let's say, let's see this example here. So let's have this example. Let's assume that I have a sample of 100 individuals, okay? And I have one intercept and 5 explanatory variables. What is the number of the degrees of freedom that I have in my model? What do you think? So this is the sample size. And those are the explanatory variables, my x's, plus the intercept. So what would be the degrees of freedom? What do you think?
94, non?
It will be exactly 94,
4,
right?
yes. Yes.
Yes.
So it will be 94.
N moins 1 moins 5.
Exactly. So it will be 94. However, if I have, in this case, let's say this 100 actually is composed of 50 individuals observed over 2 years. So I'm examining 50 individuals, how their wage has evolved over time for 2 years. So in this case, given that I have 50 individuals, I will introduce 49 dummies that measure all the unobservables related to those individuals. So in this case, I will introduce an intercept for each individual, right? So it will be 49 intercept plus the 5 variables I have. In this case, I will have 54 coefficient to be estimated. What is the number of the degrees of freedom that I have in this case? What do you think? I still have my sample of 100. So what would be the degrees of freedom?
Sorry, you can repeat. I don't get
So
the question.
the question once again, here in the first example I presented, we said that I have a sample of 100 individuals. I have 5 variables and 1 intercept to estimate. This means that the degrees of freedom are 100 minus 6, which will give me 94, right? But now I want to consider the panel structure of my model. So we said in the previous part that in order to consider this, I want to introduce a dummy variable for each individual. If I assume that I have 50 individuals that are observed over 2 waves, and I want to calculate the value of each, I want to control for the unobservables of each individual. So I will introduce a dummy variable that takes the value of 1 if the individual is Muhammad. Then a dummy variable that takes the value of 1 if the individual is Safiya and 0 otherwise. A third dummy variable that takes the value of 1 if the individual is Riham and 0 otherwise. A fourth variable that takes the value of 1 if the individual is Shayma and 0 otherwise. And so on and so forth for all the individuals I have. So this means that I'm introducing how many variables? If I have 50 individuals, I will have to introduce 49 dummy variables, right?
Yes, because we have 1 intercept for each one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I have 1 intercept for each individual, minus 1 to avoid the dummy trap. So I will have 49 coefficients to be estimated, plus the 5 explanatory variables I have. So I will have 54 coefficient to be estimated. So how many degrees of freedom do I have in this case? What do you think? It will be 100 minus 54, making the degrees of freedom 46, while before introducing the fixed effects, they were 94. So that's why the random effects in general are more economical in the sense that they do not consume a lot of degrees of freedom. Is this point clear? Any questions? So far, what are the pros and the cons of the random effect and the fixed effects model? So the fixed effects model, their main advantage is that they control for the unobservables. We don't need to assume that there is 0 correlation between the explanatory variables and we don't need to assume 0 correlation between the explanatory variables and the error term, right? That's the main advantage of the fixed effects. However, they have 2 main disadvantages. First, if I introduce them, I will not be able to include any time invariant variable. And second, they consume a lot of degrees of freedom. So if I don't have a very large sample, this might affect the robustness of my results because I will have a limited number of degrees of freedom. Okay? Is that clear?
Sorry?
Any questions? Yes?
Yes, thank you. For films data, fixed effect cannot always be used as the series are often too short, unlike country data, which covers longer periods. Right? No?
Sorry, say it again, please.
Okay. Firstly, sorry for my bad English.
No, no
For
problem.
yes, for example, for films data, fixed effects cannot always be used as the series are often too short. Il like country data which cover longer periods. So, pour appliquer les effets fixes, c'est plus pour les pays que pour les entreprises.
No, I mean,
Um,
I will respond just in
Yes.
English to let everyone understand. So what Yusuf
Thank
was
you.
saying, and correct me if I didn't get the full question, we introduce the fixed effects in case we have a longer time span. Is that correct? I mean,
Yes, yes, pour avoir un degré de liberté plus élevé.
exactly, but
Yes.
actually, this will really depend on the whole sample because if I have a large sample at the individual, I mean, if I have 2 years, just 2 years, but I have 1,000 or 2,000 individuals in my sample, right? So I will have a large sample. In this case, I can still introduce the fixed effects and I will not consume all the degrees of freedom. And even in the country regression, if I have a large sample of countries, like let's say 100 countries observed over 30 years, which means in this case I should have 3,000 observations. If I introduce 100 dummies or 99 dummies for my 100 countries, I will not consume all the degrees of freedom. So at the end of the day, what matters is to what extent my sample is large and allows me to include those fixed effects. But if the sample size is not very large, either because I have a limited number of years or because I have a limited number of individuals, either or, then it will consume my degrees of freedom, which will affect my results. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Professor.
Okay, so those are the pros and the cons of the random effects and effects. Okay, so clearly in this case, the random effect model has a composite error because if you remember here for the random effects, it will be the error term is composed of two parts, UI and new IT. So I want to take this into consideration because this means that part of the error term will be changing with individuals, right? And that's why in order to address this problem, we will have to run a generalized least squares that we use in general to resolve the problem of heteroscedasticity. Briefly, what is the rationale here? So here I want just to consider that the error term has two parts, as I said, UI and new IT. So I will assume that I have the variance of this first part and the variance of this second part. And in this case, given that I have two different variances, this means that the variance of the error term is not constant. So there is a kind of heteroscedasticity, and I have to control for that. So that's why we run a generalized least squares, or what we call in some cases weighted least squares. And the idea of the weighted least squares here is to give a lower weight for observations that have a higher variance, right? So basically, a quick reminder for the GLS before we move to the STATA part. So as you can see here, if I have here the error term, we can see that the relationship, if I plot the residuals compared to the predicted value of y, we can see that the errors are not, they do not have the same variance, whether it's here or here, where we have the relationship between the dependent and the independent variable. So in both cases, if I don't have a constant variance of the error term, I have to take this into consideration. But generally speaking, because this will be important also for the rest of the empirical part, is heteroscedasticity risky for our estimations? Why and what do you think? Don't hesitate to unmute yourself to participate. So is it risky for our estimations having heteroscedasticity? So what are the risks of having a problem of heteroscedasticity for our estimates? Do they become biased? Do they become what do we lose if we have a kind of heteroscedasticity?
I remember that the heteroscedasticity problem affects the efficiency of the estimates, so they don't have the minimum variance anymore.
Exactly, which means in this case that what we lose at the end of the day is just the efficiency of the estimates, not their biasness. And that's why we will see later when we choose between the random effects and the fixed effects that we are choosing between a kind of unbiasedness and efficiency. Because I mean, what matters first before talking about efficiency is whether the estimates are biased or not, because I cannot choose an efficient parameter while before it was beforehand. I mean, it is a biased estimator. So that's why between two unbiased estimators, I will choose the more efficient one, right? But I cannot talk about efficiency if the parameters are already biased. So that's why what we will try to resolve in the random effects model is the more or less as if I'm resolving the problem of heteroscedasticity when I run the generalized least squares. Okay? So here we can see on this graph that the size of the measurement error is proportional to the variable or to the observation I focus on. And that's why it's not constant. And if it's not constant, this means that we have heteroscedasticity, and that's why we need to run a generalized least squares. So the basic idea from basic econometrics books is we have to introduce a weight in order to give a lower weight for the errors that have a larger variance, right? And that's basically, so here we have, as you can see here, if we have a savings equation where this saving function, where the saving function depends on income, and the variance of the error term depends on this value of income, right? So here I assume that I'm aware of the structure of heteroscedasticity. So if I divide the whole function by the square root of income, which means in this case that my weight is the inverse of income, I will obtain a transformed equation, right? Where my dependent variable will be saving divided by the square root of income plus the intercept will be divided also by the square root of income, divided by beta 1 multiplied by the square root of income plus a constant. Here, sorry, not a constant, plus a part here, k, that now we're going to have a new error term that is constant, right? So which is here ki. So in this case, if I'm able to do this condition on the fact that I know the type of
الو
sorry
وي
Yusuf.
لا راه خصني تنتقيد يلاه غيطلقها قال لك مع الربعه
Yusuf, you're talking to us? Oh, okay. So in this case, the transformed equation will satisfy the Gauss-Markov assumption because here the error term will have a constant variance. And if it has a constant variance, I can proceed with all the inferential statistics that I'm used to. So, which means that I will be able to do the T statistics, the F statistics, the P values, and so on. And clearly, in this case, for the generalized least squares that we use for heteroscedasticity and that we call the weighted least squares because it's not ordinary, right? So the generalized is just the general term. Ordinary and weighted are just specific cases of the generalized least squares. Ordinary if I assume equal weights, weighted if I will add weights to the observations I have. So in this case, we're going to minimize the weighted sum of the squared of the sum of squared residuals, right? And in this case, I will have a weight that, or I will give a lower weight for observations that have a higher error variance, and this will through this weighted regression approach, I will be able to control for observations that have variable, whose errors are variable and not constant. Okay? So in this case, I mean, as I said in the beginning, this assumes that we know the relationship between the error term and or the variance, how the variance of the error term changes with the explanatory variables. But the problem is that in reality, we do not know this. And that's why in this case, we will need to estimate this weight. And in order to estimate this weight, we start with the assumption of regressing. What I basically want to do is to estimate here the delta, which will show the relationship between my explanatory variables and the variance of the error term. So I will proceed in several steps in order to do this. So I will run this regression where I have the error term regressed on my explanatory variables. If I take the log of that, it will become len the error term plus an intercept plus different explanatory variables plus the error term, right? And here we assume that the error term has an expected value of 0 and a constant variance, okay? Which is basically here, and the error term clearly can be replaced with the residual because that's what we can estimate. So I can run this regression, and then once I run this regression, I can get the weight that will be given, which will depend on those estimated parameters from this step, and then I can introduce them in as weights in my model. So this is basically the rationale of the weighted least squares, given that the weights that I was talking about, which are the H here, right, are unknown. And if they are unknown, I want to estimate them, and I will estimate them from a relationship that combines as a dependent variable the residual and the independent variable the explanatory variables. And I will then use those weights in order to run the weighted least squares. So that's basically what is done in the more or less in the random effects model. So in a nutshell, if you want to summarize, the fixed effects model is the least square dummy variable. So I basically introduce dummy variables. But for the random effects, I'm basically running a generalized least square estimation method in order to take into consideration that my error term is random and therefore has part of its components is not constant and is variable. And given that is variable, I have to give a lower weight for variables that have a higher variance. Okay. Any questions on this point?
Yes.
I have.
Sorry.
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
While comparing the fixed effect and random effect, I know that both of them are not solving completely all sources of endogeneity. But I think that the fixed effect might be if the problem is endogeneity in terms of the unobserved characteristics of individuals. So the fixed effect would be better even if the degree of freedom will be very low. So I need to know your opinion concerning this.
Yeah,
In terms of endogeneity, I mean.
sure. Perfect observation, and I totally agree with you, Riham, that in general, clearly, if we, from a purely empirical perspective, if we're comparing fixed effects and random effects, and even if we are consuming a lot of degrees of freedom, and even if we lose all the time invariant variables, definitely the fixed effects model is going to be much better than the random effects one for at least two reasons. First, because the fixed effects model considers, as you said, the unobservables, which is not the case of the random effect model. And second, which is the main or the major drawback of the random effect model, is that the random effect model assumes that we have the covariance between the explanatory variables and the error term is zero, which might not be necessarily the case. So which means that at the end of the day, and that's what I was about to say in the next slide, at the end of the day, if I rely on the random effects model, but it's biased, this means that my results are not reliable at all. So I can rely on the random effects regression if both the random effects and the fixed effects are not biased, but the random effects, they give me more efficient estimates.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. So, and especially, I mean, this is, for instance, very important, even in the case of macro studies. I mean, if in several cases, we prefer to include country dummies that will capture perhaps some time invariant variables, but this will reduce a lot of the unobservable heterogeneity that we have in the macro data. And that's why, I mean, in most of the cases, the first comment that you will get from any referee in any journal, if you run a random effect and the fixed effect, that probably the fixed effect is the preferred specification. So that's for the GLS and the fixed effects. How to choose between them to finish this quickly. So clearly, as I said, between both, which one is more likely to be unbiased, the fixed effect or the random effect? Clearly the fixed effect, because the fixed effect controls for the unobserved heterogeneity. However, if both are unbiased, then I will prefer the random effect, because the random effect takes into consideration the GLS, and therefore it provides me with more efficient estimators. So at the end of the day, I'm comparing between unbiased estimators. This will be the first criteria. And if this first criteria is satisfied, I will compare the more efficient estimate. Okay? And that's the idea of the Hausman test. And the idea of the Hausman test is basically to compare between the estimates of between the estimates of the random effect model and the fixed effect model. And I will come back to this later, but let's see the Hausman test. So basically, as you can see here, I'm comparing between the least square dummy variable, which is the fixed effect model, relative to the random effect model. So here I compare the parameters, each parameter coming from each regression, and multiplied by a weighting matrix done with the same vector of coefficients, and it follows a chi-square distribution. And here, the null hypothesis of the test is that the individual unobservables are not correlated with the variables or the covariates that I have, which means that if they are uncorrelated. So if I do not reject my null hypothesis, this means that my null hypothesis is correct, which means that in this case, I will use the random effect. However, if I reject this null hypothesis, this means that they are correlated. And if they are correlated, I cannot rely on the random effect because the random effect needs, the random effects model needs the assumption of orthogonality between x and u, which is not verified, and therefore I will have to rely on the fixed effects model. Okay, so if I reject the H node of the Haussmann test, this means that I will have to use the fixed effects and not the random effects. So if this hypothesis is rejected, the fixed effect model is preferred because it provides me with consistent estimates. If I fail to reject the null hypothesis, in this case, I will rely on the random effect because it provides me with more efficient estimates compared to the fixed effect. So is that clear? Any questions on this point?
Yes, I have a question about GLS model.
Yes.
Firstly, sorry for the inconvenience. I received a call. My question is, can we use the robust command in STATA instead of estimating GLS? What is the difference between this command and the GLS model?
You mean the command of the GLS and the command of the random effect?
No, la commande robuste en STATA in STATA. Robust command.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
No, basically, it's more or less the same, given that if you add the option Rob in STATA, it gives you standard errors where you correct for heteroscedasticity. But here I was just talking about the generalized least squares because this is basically what is done in the background of STATA when it runs the random effect model. So
Okay.
if you run the random effect model xtreg, comma, re, as we will see later,
Yes.
you will see in what appears that in the first part of the table that it's the generalized least squares. So that was just the idea. But in the background memory of STATA, it's running a generalized least squares, but basically it's a random effect model.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so that's for the Haussmann, and clearly here the weighting matrix that is used will depend on the variance of the estimators that we have in our model for both the least square dummy variable, which is the fixed effects, compared to the random effects. A point that is very important in STATA that the order matters. So I have really to make sure that I run the fixed effect model, the random effect model, and then I ask STATA to compare between the estimates of the fixed effects and the random effects. So I have just to be consistent in terms of the order of the regressions and what I ask STATA to compare. Okay, as we will see later. There are some other tests, perhaps a bit less used, but I will present them briefly to have an idea about those tests. First, whether whether I will have to rely on the fixed effect regression or the pooled regression that does not consider this time dimension of the sample. So we have to say we have just to compare or to have a test that compares the model with dummy variable relative to the model without the dummy variables. And like in most of those types of tests, we compare two models through with an F test, right? That relies on their R squared. So it's exactly similar to most of the tests that we have seen to compare different models with and without some variables. We see actually whether the model with more dummies is more significant or not compared to the model with, or has a higher explanatory power compared to a model without dummies. So as you can see here, the F-test that we run on the joint significance of the dummies included in the model will basically compare the R squared of the least square dummy variable model relative to the R squared of the pooled model compared relative to their degrees of freedom, divided by 1 minus the R squared of the least square dummy variables. So here, if the F-test is statistically significant, this means that I cannot assume that the two models are the same, and therefore the least square model has a more important or contributes more to the understanding of the phenomenon that we're interested in. And that's why we have to include those dummy variables, okay, compared to the pooled cross-section one. Clearly, another test, but it's also not used as the one of the Haussmann test, is the one where we also test between the random effect and the normal OLS. So basically, the random effect with the pooled cross section. And in this case, what we do basically, we run the Broch-Pagan test that I think that you have also seen at the undergrad level, in the sense that we have a test that follows a chi-square distribution, where we test whether we have a constant variance of the error term or not. And in this case, our null hypothesis, as you can see here, will be that the expected value of UIT multiplied by UIS, so the product of the two variables, is equal to 0. And the alternative hypothesis is that they are different from 0. So it has a chi-square distribution, and we can calculate from it the Lagrange multiplier. So if we reject the null hypothesis, this means once again we cannot rely on the pooled OLS, but we have to consider the weighted least squares or the generalized least squares. So those two minor tests I was talking about, where I compared the model, the OLS or the pooled model, with the least square dummy variable or the random effect or the generalized least squares versus the OLS model, was just to compare between pooled versus random effects or fixed effects. But in most of the cases, if I have a panel model, I will definitely need to use a panel structure or a panel estimation. So the question now is not to choose between OLS and random effect or fixed effect, but what I will choose between the random effect and the fixed effect. And that's what we have seen here in the Haussmann test, that compares the estimates from the least square dummy variable compared to the random effect in terms of the estimates and in terms of their variance. And if we reject the null hypothesis, we have to, and the null hypothesis here is that the X is uncorrelated with the error term. So in this case, if I reject the null hypothesis, I cannot use the random effect. I will have to use the fixed effect. And if I do not reject it, I can use the random effect. So to summarize this, in general, random effects, they are efficient. If they are unbiased, but if they are biased, I cannot rely on them, because in this case, efficiency does not matter. The fixed effects are in general more likely to be unbiased, right? The problem of the advantage of the random effect model is that it can help me introduce time invariant variable. It's more economical in terms of the degrees of freedom, and also one of the points is that, as we said before, is if I have a small sample size, it will help me not consume a lot of degrees of freedom, right? However, against the random effect, clearly, if I omit the fixed effects, I will have a misspecification and an omitted variable bias, which will bias the results. I will not be able to use them, and which will lead to inconsistent estimates. And so therefore, even if the fixed effects are inefficient, but they are consistent. And clearly, I will, for me, what matters more is the consistency of the estimate more than its efficiency. Okay? So that's for just the theoretical background that we need before we start working on the do file that I will share now. Any question or anything that's not clear? Very quickly, because we don't have time, unfortunately, to cover the dynamic panel, but so far we have been talking about the random and the fixed effects. And in both cases, we have been talking about time t. So we do not consider the time dimension of the panel structure. However, in some cases, I'm interested in including in my model the historical values of the dependent variable. And the main argument, following Arellano and Bond, Arellano and Bover, and all different econometricians that developed those methods, is that the best instrument of a variable is its historical values, even if this argument can be heavily criticized because a historical value does not really control for the endogeneity. And I mean, in most of the papers, if you submit a paper and you just argue that you will introduce a lagged value, the paper will not pass. But the advantage of introducing historical values is that it helps you control for the inertia that you might have, in the sense that if I have a high growth today, probably this will increase my growth tomorrow. So that's why having both, the historical values in my model will help me control for the inertia that exists in the historical values. And that's the basic idea of the dynamic panel. So the dynamic panel in a nutshell, and you will have some more technical details in the slides, but I don't want to spend the whole lecture in theory to move to the empirics, is that to introduce among the explanatory variables the lagged value of the dependent variable. It's a practice that is much more used in macro data more than micro data, because basically, if you do this in the micro data, you will lose 1 year. And in the micro data, we don't have a lot of waves. So that's why, but for the macro data, when you have country level data, you have 30 years, 40 years, then you have more freedom to lose 1 year. But if you lose 1 year from your micro data set, it's a huge loss. So that's why the dynamic panel is much more used in macro applications rather than micro applications. Okay. So that's basically the idea of the dynamic panel. Any questions so far? Anything that's not clear?
Doctor, I have a quick question related to the dynamic panels.
Yes.
It's still in a nutshell. So you just mentioned that in dynamic panels, usually we still have the problem with endogeneity, right?
Yes.
So usually we use, so can we use the GMM to account for or to overcome this problem? Or we still have the problem?
Well, in theory, you can. However, now, empirically speaking, even the GMM estimation technique is becoming heavily criticized in the empirical work, as conceptually speaking, it does not address the problem of endogeneity, in the sense that if you introduce, because Arellano and Bond, they developed different ways of addressing endogeneity by instrumenting with the lagged values, with the first differences, with instrumenting the historical values by the first differences, and all those combinations. However, conceptually speaking, you do not control for the endogeneity, in the sense that if let's say I'm interested in the relationship between productivity and economic growth. So countries that have a high productivity might have a high economic growth, but again, countries that have a high growth might have a high productivity. So if I instrument one of the two variables with the historical values of the other, this does not resolve, conceptually speaking, the endogeneity between them, because still you have to introduce another exogenous variable that is different from both in order to properly address endogeneity. So that's why in most of the well-published papers, you will see that the IV method is preferred much more than the GMM one.
Okay, thank you, doctor.
Other
Doctor,
questions?
you said that panel data from enterprise survey not good for analyze. Why exactly?
No, I didn't say it's not good. I just said that for the World Bank Enterprise Survey, we have around 200,000 observations now in the most recent version of it, which means that we have, around 150 countries. Each country has at least one or two rounds. So having this huge database means that in theory we should have a lot of firms that are followed over time. However, in the World Bank Enterprise Survey, only a small fraction of the sample is followed over time. As far as I remember, the panel dimension, I can confirm after the break, but it will never exceed 25% of the sample, which means that if you want to work with the panel version of the World Bank Enterprise Survey, you will lose around 75% of the sample that you work on. And that's why in most of the cases, when we work with the World Bank Enterprise Survey, we work with the pooled version, not the panel version. It's very good. I personally use the World Bank Enterprise Survey a lot, and Riham has also used it in several papers. All of us, we
Yes.
use the World Bank Enterprise Surveys, but mainly in the pooled version. I don't remember, Riham, in your paper on access to finance and global value chains, you used also the pooled or the panel version?
The pool version, yeah.
Yeah. So because if you use the panel version, you will lose a lot.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now it's 4:27. So before I start STATA, perhaps let's break now to avoid working 3 minutes, and then we have the break after. So we will be back in 15 minutes from now, and we will have a session that is fully empirical, no theory anymore. Okay, thank you, and see you in 15 minutes. Okay, let's start working on the LNPS. Before just moving to the do file and the data, I just want to show you two slides just to confirm a couple of things that we have seen in the theoretical part before we proceed with the empirical part. Because on STATA, as you know, I'm sure that some of you has already used this in STATA. So in order to run a fixed effect model, we use the command xtreg. So xtreg, and we add fe at the end to show that it's the fixed effects model. And as you can see here, for the correlation between the error term and the explanatory variable is not equal to 0. And this confirms the previous point that we are talking about, because the random effects model requires that the correlation is equal to 0. However, for the fixed effects model, it's not the case. Then we have here the observation. We have the total number of observation, 70. The number of groups is 7. And for each group, we have 10 observations, which means that we have, for instance, 10 years for each individual, okay? Then we get the classical coefficients, nothing really special. That was just the main issue I wanted to show you, that here for the fixed effects, the correlation is not equal to 0, right? If we look at the you will receive this in all cases and you will read all the details. But if you look at the random effects model here, you will see that it's the GLS regression, as we said in the beginning. Then the correlation between U and X is assumed and equal to 0, right? And this is an important point in the random effects model. So that's why at the end of the day, the random effect is a GLS, but the fixed effects is a least square dummy variable model. Two final points before we move to the data and the do file. Here, sorry. We said that for the fixed effects model, we are basically introducing a dummy variable for each individual. How many individuals do we have here? What do you think in this example? How many individuals?
10.
7.
No?
We have 7. Exactly.
We have 10.
Yes.
7 individuals, which means that in this case, we're going to introduce 6 dummies. So if I run a normal OLS and instead of running XTREG, comma, fixed effects, and I run a normal OLS, but I add a dummy for each country, I will get exactly the same results. So this was also just to confirm that the least square dummy variables is a fixed effects model. Are these 2 points clear? So the fact that the random effect is a GLS and how we can see it on STATA, that the fixed effect is a least square dummy variable model, and we get exactly the same coefficients if we compare the 2 slides. And then finally, if we compare both, after running the XTREG fixed effects, and we ask STATA to store the results under fixed, we call them fixed, we can call them anything, we can call them Shahir, we can call them Ramaj, but the most important thing is to keep the same names afterwards. And then XTREG, we store the random effects, and then we write Hausman fixed random. So we want to run the Hausman test for the 2 estimations that have been stored, which are the fixed and the random. And as you can see here, STATA will compare the coefficient of the fixed and the random effects, their difference, and their variance. And here, the H node is, I remind you that the H node here is that the error term and the covariates are uncorrelated. So if we reject that, this means that they are correlated, and therefore we cannot use the random effect, but we have to use the fixed effects. So here from this test, as you can see, the probability, the p-value of the test is 0.05, which means that it's statistically significant. And if it's statistically significant, therefore we reject the H node, and therefore we cannot use the random effect, but we have to use the fixed effects model, right? And as you can see here also in the, just to confirm what we have seen also in the theoretical part, here the small b shows that our estimates are consistent under both hypotheses, H0 and HA, but the capital B, which is the one of random, they are inconsistent under HA, efficient under H0, right? And that's why, as I said, we are comparing consistency versus efficiency. So, but I cannot rely on parameters that are efficient, but that are not consistent. So that's why if both, if I have one consistent and the other inconsistent, I will have to use the consistent. If I have two consistent, I will have to rely on the most efficient. Okay. Any questions? Anything that's not clear? Okay. I will move now to STATA with the database that you will get and the do file as well. I will share now the screen. Now you can see STATA, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So here we have perhaps to make it clean, let's do it like that. So you will get the data with the do file, and then you can use, the do file to replicate it on other data sets if you wish.
Sir, you can share with us the do file and the data if you
Yes,
can.
you will receive them with the rest of the material.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is the ELMPS, and for those who have never used the ELMPS, it's a very rich database that looks at the labor market from different perspectives. We have dozens of variables, hundreds of variables even, that is regularly updated in terms of the modules included. So we have classical questions where the individual is working in which sector, which economic activity, the gender, education, experience, age, location, gender, really all that. Then some variables that can be constructed also to determine the micro and small firms, household firms, right, from the ELMPS. We have a migration module, we have a time use module that can be used to determine how many hours, for instance, a woman is working at her place compared to her work in outside home, and so on. So it's very rich. So far at ERF we have the ELMPS for Egypt for several rounds, 1988, but it's not a panel. It's not part of the panel. Let's put it this way. Then 1998, 2006, 2012, 2018, and 2023 that will be out soon, or perhaps it's already out, I don't remember. But in all cases, we have all the advantage of this database is that you can follow the same individuals over 20 years, which is a very long period. So you can really look at the transition of individuals between jobs, between the formal and informal sector, and so on. A lot of things have been done using the ELMPS. That's on the one hand. Then for other countries, we have also the SLMPS, the one of Sudan, that is, I think, that was launched in 2022 or 2023, something like that. We have the TLMPS, one round for Tunisia, and we have two rounds for Jordan, 2010 and 2018 or 14. But we have two rounds. I don't remember these exactly. So in a nutshell, we have this for Egypt for 5 rounds, Tunisia 1 round, Sudan 1 round, and Jordan 2 rounds. Most of the questions are harmonized across the different surveys. So you can also combine those surveys together and have the country and the time dimension, which is also very rich. However, some countries that can also have specific modules. For instance, the issue of refugees is important in Jordan. So that's why we have a module on refugees in Jordan, and so on. Okay. The version we'll be using today, it's mainly the one of Egypt for just 2 rounds to have a simple exercise and to start with. And then, as you know, in general, whenever you work with a software, it's a learning by doing process. So you get the do file, then you understand the commands, you start running it on your own data, you replicate what has been already done, and so you will see that the do file that you will receive is very detailed. And the advantage of that, 2 things. First, that you get to understand everything, even if the points that will not be able to cover during today's workshop. That's on the one hand. And on the other, for those also who have not worked a lot with STATA, or even those who work, because personally, my do files have improved over time. In the beginning, I was in a rush just to run the regressions without really having a clean and clear do file with all the steps described. And as I said yesterday, it's very useful if you're working with someone, or if you someone, or if you want to rerun the regressions after you get some revisions, for instance, from a referee. Okay. So first, there are 2 important commands that you have to run whenever you start working on any database, which are a command called D and a command called CD. CD, we ask STATA to change the directory, in the sense that I will write CD and then I will put the location of all the empirical work I want to do. The advantage of that is that in general, STATA will locate the folder itself and will work within this folder. So if you want to generate results of regressions, or if you want to generate descriptive statistics, everything will be generated within this folder. So you have to always start your empirical work with the command CD, and you write the file path. So for instance, in my case, I will put down, let's say, in my documents. Okay, I will put it here. So this will be my location. Okay. So this means that everything will be, the data, the do files, the results, everything will be included in this folder. That's the first important thing. Second thing is, I want to understand what is included in my database. And that's why there is a command called D. D stands for describe. And the describe will generate a list of the variable name, whether it's a number or it's a text, string or integer, then the label itself. So as you can see here, we have the round, because we have different rounds from the Egyptian case. We have the individual ID, we have the household ID, the identification of the household to which the individual belongs. Then we have the code of the individual within the household, whether the individual is number 1, number 2, number 3, until number 10, right? And then we have also an important variable, which is called attr. Attr is the attrition variable, which, and so there is a command, for instance, called tabulate, tab in STATA. If I write the attrition variable, as you can see here, you can see the screen, right?
Yes.
We have, all in all, for 3 rounds, we have 110,000 individuals, right? Out of those 110,000 individuals, around 40,000 are included in the 3 rounds, 8,000 only 98 and 2006, 6,000 in 98, 31,000 in 2006 and 2012, and then 4,000 in 2006 and 20,000 in 2012 only. So this means that if I want to work with the panel version of the database, I will just have to focus on the first category because they are the individuals that are in the 3 rounds. If I'm interested in 2 rounds, which what we will do today, then I will look at those who are in part of 2006 and 2012, which is this category and this category, right? So this is important if you want to work with the panel version. Clearly, also one of the things that our statistics department does at ERF is that it harmonizes different rounds. So once the 2023 round will be out, you will have also a version for 1998 on its own with all its variables, 2006 with its variables, 2012 and 12, 18 and 23, each data set with its variables, but we can also have a consolidated version that includes all the rounds in one database with just the harmonized questions. Okay. So those are just some preliminaries. Clearly, one of the variables, if we look at the labor force survey that might be interesting, is the real hourly wage. So what is the real hourly wage that an individual can get if he or she works, right? So in STATA, the command that is largely used is the summarize. So, and the name of the variable, if I write it here, real hourly wage, in given that it's real, so I'm deflating the wage by the consumer price index of 2012. So to have all the wages expressed in the same price, so it will be this variable that I will be interested in. So if I run the summarize of the real hourly wage, as you can see here, we observe the wage for 27,000 observations. The mean is 6 Egyptian pounds. The standard deviation is 12, with a minimum of 0.04 and a maximum 800 Egyptian pounds in real terms. Okay. But what I might be interested in, so this is the command sum, which stands for summarize. If I want more statistical details, I can run the summarize and add at the end that, which stands for details. And in this case, I will get more details with the different percentiles. So the first percentile, 5th, 10th, 25th, the median, the other percentiles, the skewness, the kurtosis, the observations, and so on. Okay. Now let's move to more interesting things. For instance, here, as I said, we are interested in the real wage, and I want to look at how the wage has evolved over time. How many years do we have? We have so far 3 rounds, right? 1998, 2006, and 2012. So there is a command, and also perhaps I will start with that because it doesn't work and then show you what works. And the idea here is that, as you will see, STATA is regularly updated. So some commands might work with a certain state and other commands might not work. So, for instance, I'm interested in the real wage of those who are working and in the age of working. In the age of working in Egypt, it's between 15 and 64. So I have to limit add a condition to my command to limit those who are working between 15 and 64. That's one. And those who are wage worker, because I don't want to include, for instance, self-employed, right? So there is a variable called age. So if I write some age, I will get the age. Clearly here, this might be perhaps an outlier or an incorrect variable because here it's 120. And we have another variable called current employment status. So if we look at this variable, if I tabulate this variable, you will see that we have wage worker, employer, self-employed, and unpaid family worker. Clearly, if I'm interested in the evolution of wages, I have to look at wage workers. So that's why if I want to look at the evolution of wage over time, I will write this command. Okay, and as you can see here, what I have in this command, I don't know if it's readable or not, but I will read it. So we have table, that's the command itself, and then I put the round because I want to have the different figures by round, and then I add a condition if the age is greater than 15 and less than 64, if the current employment status is 1, which is wage worker, right? Then I will add the weight, and I will talk about it in a few seconds. And what I want is C stands for content. I want the median wage. Okay, so basically what I want here from this command is the median wage of those who are wage workers in the age of working between 15 and 64 by round. Is that clear? Any questions? Anything that's not clear?
It's clear. Sir, why you use median and not percentile, like 75% in
We
the
can
median?
do it the way you prefer. Here, it's just an example, given that the median in general is much more robust than the mean. So here we will look at the median of the real hourly wage.
Yes, but I ask about the percentile, like
You can, I mean, you can replace here the median with whatever you want.
yeah. And when we decide to use, for example, the percentile and not the median, which we compare the median with the mean, or what?
If you want a measure of central tendency, then you will have to use either the median or the mean. The advantage of the median compared to the mean is that the median is not sensitive to outliers. But if you want to look at extremes, then you can look at the first percentile, the first decile, the top decile, the top percentile, and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So any questions on this command before we proceed? So I will run this command, and as you can see, it's not working. So what STATA tells me, option content, so the C that I have here, is not allowed since STATA 17. C help table for update syntax. So this means that if given that my STATA here is STATA 18, then this command does not work. So that's why there is another command that works where basically we replace here the C with the statistic itself. I mean the option statistic, and the rest does not change. Okay, so why I included both, because you will see that perhaps if you have STATA 14, 15, 16, or 17, it will work, but if you have STATA 18, 19, it will not work. Okay, so that's regarding the command. An important point regarding the weights. Here, as you can see, I'm writing PW equal expand, right? This is one of the most important variables that you have to use whenever you work with STATA. So whenever, sorry, you work with labor force surveys, because here that's the expansion weight. What does the expansion weight mean? It means that if I'm working with a survey, then I will ask the questions to Ganna, to Yusuf, to Noha, to Riham, to Ahmed, and so on, right? So far, I have 5 individuals. But to make it nationally representative, each individual must have a weight. So perhaps the weight of Ganna will be 10%, the weight of Yusuf will be 15%, the weight of Noha will be 17%, the weight of Ahmed will be 5%, the weight of Riham will be 17%, and so on. So each individual has a weight to make the survey nationally representative. And we have, in general, in STATA, 4 types of weights. We have what we call the F weight, frequency weight. Then we have the P weight, which is the sampling weight, the most used. Then we have the A weight, the analytical weight. And we have the I weight, or what we call the importance weight. Okay? So 4 weights: F weight, P weight, A weight, and I weight. F weight stands for the frequency weight. And in general, those are the weights that indicate the number of duplicated observations. It's not really related to our research question, because what we're interested in is the representativeness, right? And that's why the 2 weights that are interesting for us are either the analytical weight or the probability weight, which is the P weight and the A weight. The P weight is mainly the sampling weight, which in general show the inverse of the probability that the observation is included in the is included because of the sample design. So in other words, I will assign a weight to each individual that is equal to the inverse of the probability that the individual will be part of the survey because of the sample design itself. The A weight in general, for most of the descriptive statistics, which is the analytic weight, is very similar to the P weight, and both of them, they generate more or less the same thing. However, for the A weight, what is different is that they are in general, they are inversely proportional to the variance of the observation. Okay. So in this case, if I run a regression, if I run any descriptive statistics with P weight or analytic weight, I will get exactly the same thing. Okay. The I weight, which is the importance weight, it's not very used because in general, the word importance, it's a bit vague. And in general, if it's used, this means that those who code the weight itself, they have something in mind that is different from the analytic weight and from the probability weight or the sampling weight. And that's why they will code it to reflect something that is important. So that's why it's a very specific case. So in a nutshell, from the 4 options that we have, F weight, A weight, P weight, and I weight, we mainly use either P weight or A weight. In our case here, we are using the sampling weight, which is the probability, the P weight, which is the inverse of the probability that the individual is selected or is included because of the sampling design. And clearly, any descriptive statistics work that is based on labor force surveys or firm surveys, we have to consider those weights, because in some cases they can really give different figures compared to the observations themselves, and I will show you this later. Okay. So that's for the command. So if I run this command, normally that it works, as you can see here, we have the real hourly wage of those who work, the mean real hourly wage of those who are wage worker between 15 and 64 over different surveys. And as you can see here, the real wage overall in Egypt has been declining, then increasing, and then declining once again. So here I'm talking there is no price effect because I have real hourly wage. Okay. So that's an example of. So why I started with this command for two reasons. First, because to show you the importance of weights, that we, in any descriptive statistics work, we need to use the weights, that's one. Two, to start first with one of the variables that we're interested in and how it evolves over time, okay? We can rerun exactly the same command, but with the median. And as you can see, if I compare the median, in general, what do you see? So if we compare the mean in the first table relative to the median in the second table, what do you see?
Decline.
Exactly, it's lower. So for all the values that we have in the mean, we have lower values in the median. This means that wages in general are skewed, right? Because of the outliers that we have in the database.
Or affected with the extreme value
exactly,
or wages.
Extreme values, exactly. Okay. Another variable that we're interested in and that we can do also is to see the level of education in our database. And the level of education called educational attainment, called EDUC2. Then if we check this, we will have the educational attainment, illiterate, literate without any diploma, elementary school, middle school, general high school, vocational high school, post-secondary, university and above, right? So what I want to see, how education has evolved. But for whom? For those who are, again, wage worker, because I'm interested in wage workers in general, and for those who are employed. So here there is a variable called caremp1. If we tabulate this variable, you will see that the responses are 0 and 1. So 0 if the individual is not working, and 1 if the individual is working based on the market definition. Okay? So I want to see how the level of education has been evolving over time, right? By round for those who are in the age of working and for those who are wage workers. So working and wage work. So what do we have here? By sort round, in order to have the results by round, okay? Then I want to tabulate education, so the variable that we have just seen, and the current employment status, wage worker, employer, self-employed, and so on. For those who are working, so current employment with market definition equal to 1, in the age of working, and again, I introduce the expansion weight, and I want to calculate the shares relative to the row, and to have, without having the frequency, so the number of cases that we have in the database. If I run this, as you can see, we have 3 tables, right? So a table that shows the employment status of the primary job, wage worker, employer, self-employed, or unpaid family work. we have the shares of for those who are illiterate, right? 100%, and how they are distributed over the different types of employment status. And we do the same exercise or the same calculation for different educational levels by round. We have here 1998, 2006, and then 2012, right? So here we have those comments, this comment, sorry, that creates a table for each round. That we have so the different educational levels by employment status and by different rounds, okay? And clearly, in general, what we do observe is that wage work, the share of wage workers increases with the level of education. So we move from 50% to 80%, or even more than 80% for higher levels of education. Okay. Next step would be to see how the real hourly wage is changing with education, because what we expect, if for instance Ghana has a master's degree but Riham has a PhD degree, so we should expect that Riham will have a higher wage compared to Ghana, right? So I want to see how the wage is changing with the level of education. And to do so, we will repeat more or less the same thing. So the same command that we have seen before, table, and then by education and round. So I will, you can see it here. So table, education round, if the current employment status is equal to 1 and the primary job is equal also to 1 with wage work, again with the expansion weight. And the statistic I want to include is the median of the real hourly wage. Okay. Again, I can replace here the median by the mean, by the minimum, the maximum, any statistic. And if we run this, what you can see here, we have different rounds of surveys, we have the different levels of educations, and we have the real hourly wage. Okay. So clearly, we can see that those who have a lower level of education, they have a lower wage. So we move from 2.8 Egyptian pounds to almost 5.2. And we can also analyze this over time. So overall, the wage of those who have a university and above increased from 5.2 to 6.2. So more or less, so if we calculate growth rates, we will see that those who have higher levels of education, they experience lower levels of growth rates. Okay. And clearly, perhaps this is minor, but worth also mentioning, we can ask STATA to extract this in an Excel file, okay? Or we can copy and paste it in Excel. In order to copy and paste, when we do it, we have to copy table as HTML, not copy table, neither copy as picture. Because if you copy as picture, you will not be able to edit it. If you copy, just copy, all the numbers will be inserted in the same cell, but it has to be copied as HTML. And then if you copy and paste, you will get the numbers that you want. And then you can increase or decrease the number of decimals and so on. Okay? So the most important thing is that when you copy and paste, you copy as HTML, not just copy. Okay? You will see in the do file that there are some other technical notes on how to make tables nicer or better. But I want also to talk about another command that is also very useful, which is that we call the tab out. I don't know if you have used it before or not, but the tab out command, in general, its idea is that it helps us extract directly a certain table to STATA, right? So if I want to see the level of education by round, taking into consideration the expansion weight, and I will call here the table, let's say, ERF1, okay? And I want to include in the shares, for instance, here the column. So here, as you can see, the table is generated. It's not very reader friendly, but if we look at my change directory, within the folder of the change directory, you will see that STATA also generated this file by education, and you can see the Excel file, right?
Yes.
So here we have the different education by year. So the 100% is for each year. So the number of illiterate, how much literate, and so on. And then I can do it also here. The sum is over the column. I can also do it over the rows, right? And the advantage of this command of tab out is that it gives me directly the tables that I can use and put into my paper. Any questions on that so far? So currently we have seen so far three commands that are useful when it comes to extracting some descriptive statistics. We have table, we have tab stat, and we have tab out. Okay. Another thing is that I can also ask STATA to generate some tables in the form of matrices. Why is that important? For instance, if I want a matrix of the median wage in 1998, and then another matrix for 2006, another matrix for 2012. In order to use those different matrices, save them, and use them in order to generate and to use those matrices and extract them using a very useful command, which is estat, estout command. So you will see also in the do file, there is a code related to extracting those matrices. I'll not go through it now, but you can see that I can, instead of having those ready-made tables that you can see, I can define a matrix called median wage that includes different statistics, where we have a matrix including the wage of each education category, right? So I will just a second, why it's not working here. Did I drop something? Oh, sorry. So I will run a matrix, as you can see here, a matrix called med wage that has different values, and then I will include different values from different rounds in this matrix. Okay. So if I repeat this for each round, I will get a matrix called median wage. As you can see here, okay. Here it's not working for the first year. Let me check why. But in all cases, I can also change the names and get a matrix with the labels and the years. So here, this was just because after all this, I can run a command. As you can see here, it's called stout. Okay, and if I write stout, sorry, the matrix with the name of the matrix and the number of decimals that I want, it will be extracted in an Excel file, right? So I'm going to have in the same directory I was talking about, more or less the same matrix. Okay. So clearly, you will see in the do file. Perhaps I want to show you this here. You can see the do file.
Yes,
You can
sir.
see. So here the do file is a bit long to construct this matrix, but the objective is just to show you how from simple tables we can construct a matrix, and after the matrix we run this stout command, because the stout command can be used for regressions, can be used to construct some coefficient plots, can be used for a lot of things. So that was just the rationale of doing that, is even if you can get the table directly without really having to having to take really this long path just to get the same table that you get with a simple command. Okay. Any questions on this part so far? So far, we haven't started the panel, but just to become a bit more friendly with the data that we have. So we have seen so far, I just want to recap a bit to make sure that we are on the same page. So far for the LMPS, we have seen generally the structure of the data with the individual ID, the household ID, because some of the questions are at the household level. We have several modules related to the employment status, the primary job, the economic activity, the characteristics of the sector where the individual is working, other modules related to the migration, to time use, to refugees, and so on. So that's in terms of the structure, first point. Second point, in terms of the data, the descriptive statistics, we have seen 3 points. The first one is the importance of using the expansion weights. This is fundamental. Second, the commands that we can use in order to generate some tables that are either extracted in Excel or that can be copied and paste, or that can be used in the form of a matrix, right? And third, how we can cross-tabulate different variables for different routes and so on. So first, the structure of the data. Second, the descriptive statistics. And third, and that's what we will be doing now. It's a bit related also to the descriptive statistics, where we can generate graphs. I know that in general, it can be a bit hectic to have graphs on STATA, but the advantage of doing the graphs on STATA is that in general you don't need to generate first the tables and then construct the graphs. So in general, what we do in general, we generate the tables first from our database. We export the tables in Excel, and from those tables in Excel, we construct the graphs. So there's an additional step, and then you have to change the legend, the colors, and all this. All this can be done in one command in Stata. It's a bit long as a command, but once you write it, you can change any option that you want to change. And you will see in the code that we will share with you an example of generating, for instance, the median wage over time and for different levels of education. So I will just run this command to show you what do we get. So you can see the graph, right?
Yes, sir.
So here we have the evolution of wage over by round for different levels of education. And we can see that in general, there is an increase with the exception of this category. But other than this, the increase is either very small or slightly larger in some categories, right? So clearly, in terms of the code, it's a bit long. It's all this part, right? But at the same time, if you want to change anything in terms of the legend, in terms of the legend, or in terms of the color, or in terms of what is included, the median, the mean, all this can be changed in the command itself. Okay. In the last 20 minutes, we will work once again with the panel database that we have, right? And we have seen the attrition point. So now I want to keep the individuals who were observed in 2006 and 2012. So among those categories, which one do I have to keep? What do you think?
The fourth one?
First one, yes.
No. The fourth one and the first one as well, because the first one includes individuals who are included in the 3 rounds, but the fourth one only 2006 and 2012. So if I'm interested in the individuals who are included in only 2 rounds, I have to keep the first and the fourth category. So I will ask Stata to keep the individuals if attrition variable is equal to 1 or to 4. Okay? So we can see that 67,000 observations have been deleted. And I want to make sure that only the years I'm interested in are included. So I will ask Stata to keep if the round is equal to 2006 or 2012. Okay? So if I tabulate round, I will see that I have only 2006 and 2012. That's 1. 2, we can see that I have only the same individuals that are observed in the 2 rounds. That's why for each round, we have exactly the same number of individuals. Is that clear? Okay.
Yes.
So now we have, as you can see here, we have a lot of variables on the educational attainment.
Sorry, Professor.
Sorry?
Thank you. I have a question. There will be no problem with the simple not being representative, no?
No, this sample, the LMS is generally nationally representative. So it is nationally representative.
But many observation deleted. So
You mean because we focus on the panel?
yes.
But in general, if in the, I mean, you will see later that we have. Perhaps let me show that this is a very good question. Let me show you this. So there is, I showed you the expand weight, right? This is the expansion factor and weight, correct?
Yes.
If I want to use the panel, in general, the statisticians, they include another weight that you can use. And here, as you can see, on your right-hand side, we have 3 other weights. We have the panel weight for 1998 to 2006, panel weight 1998 2012, and panel weight 2006 2012. So in my descriptive work and my empirical work, I will have to use, in this case, this weight, which is called panel WT06012.
Okay. As an anecdote, I already did this is my article I submitted, and the reviewer gave me major revision about it. So
About the weight that you used, you mean?
yes, parce que j'ai enlevé des observations. Du coup, c'est pas représentatif. Ouais.
Oui, mais si vous enlevez des observations, dans ce cas, il faut que vous utilisiez le poids convenable.
Ah, d'accord. Ah, je vois, parce que c'est pour ça ils m'ont donné ça comme suggestion et j'ai pas très bien compris.
Voilà, donc
Ah, oui,
j'espère que c'est
For,
plus clair.
yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So in a nutshell, clearly, as Yusuf said, if you use the traditional weight, it might not be representative because you removed a lot of observations. But here in this case, we have the panel weight that should be used for each panel in this case. Okay. What we will do, given that we don't have a lot of time, we'll just keep the variables that we will be using, which are the individual ID, his or her real hourly wage, the education, the wealth, the round, the current employment status, and whether the individual is employed or not. Okay? So we keep this, and we can, here the data is what we call long or wide. Here it's long in the sense that you have all the individuals with their respective years. So here the data is long. We can reshape the data to have it wide, even if in the panel work in general it has to be long. But why is in some cases working with a wide data might be interesting if you want to compare the status before and after, for instance, and if you want to calculate growth rates, so you can reshape from wide to long. Yes, Noha?
Sorry, I have a question related back to the weights. Just a quick question. So what's the difference between the analytical weight and the panel weight in this sense?
Here, in the sense, given that in the previous weight that we had, which is the expansion weight, and I just want to rectify a small point here. For the P weight or the A weight, we use in both cases the expansion weight. Okay, the P weight and A weight is just the command that we use in STATA. However,
sorry, the expansion weight. Oh,
yes. So the expansion weight is used whenever we have the whole data. But if I'm using the panel dimension of the database, I have to consider this dimension in the sense that I removed a lot of individuals. So if I removed a lot of individuals, clearly the eligibility of individuals or their inclusion into the sample will change, which will change the expansion weight they have. And that's why this new weight that we have in the panel reflects this new structure.
So it considers that we're using jointly two years and dropping other years.
And dropping also other individuals, either that have been that are in 2012 and not in 2006, or that are in 2006 and not in 2012. So the attrition in both, actually.
Okay, so in case we're using the panel including 1998, which panel weight are we going to use? Because it's
we'll
not
have
included.
to use in this case the panel weight of 98, 6, and 12, which we have also in the database.
Oh, okay.
So in a nutshell, we have 4 weights. We have the weights of the pooled version. We have the weights for the panel 9806, 06, 12, 98, 06, and 12.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay. Now it's mission impossible because we want to at least look at the panel data model of wages. So let me move to this, and then the rest of the technical details, you will have it in all cases in the do file. So let's generate the real hourly wage, okay? And again, keep if we have 2006 and 2012 only. So I will just work with those individuals. And then we just want to see how we have different factors that affect the real hourly wage. So for the example that you will see in the do file, we have the stability of work, whether the work is stable or not. So whether it's temporary, permanent, seasonal, intermittent, as you can see here in the table I have just generated. So let's generate a dummy variable that will measure the stability of the work. Okay, and in this case, we're going to have a variable, right? That according to which, if so we have different variables of stability, whether the individual is a permanent, temporary, or an irregular worker, right? Because we expect, for instance, that all those who are temporary or irregular, they are likely to get a lower wage. Similarly, we can also see whether the individual is working in the government, in public enterprise, private, joint venture, or foreign, or other, right? Let's create a simple variable, binary variable, that takes the value of 1 if the individual is working in the public sector and 0 otherwise. And that's what we've done, okay? And then another variable for the economic activity. So economic activity is whether the individual is working in the manufacturing sector, and here the variable is called current ECAC1D, current economic activity at the 1-digit level. As you can see here, we have agriculture, forestry, mining, manufacturing, electricity, water, and all the services that we have, okay? We can recode them by having just 3 sectors. So manufacturing, services, and agriculture. And you will see also the details in the do file that we'll send. So now let's regress something that is very simple, where I'm going to regress the years of schooling, where I'm going to regress the real hourly wage on the years of schooling if the individual is working. Here, this is the OLS. As you can see, I run the regress of the real hourly wage, years of schooling, for those who are working and those who are wage workers. I have 17,000 observations. The years of schooling exerts a positive impact on the real hourly wage. I will make it a bit more sophisticated in the sense that, and here clearly, this is a Manserian model in the sense that I'm saying that higher years of schooling imply a higher wage, right? I will add other variables like the stability of work, whether the individual is male or female, the public sector. And if I run this regression, sorry, I didn't generate the gender variable. Now I think it should work. No. Oh, I didn't generate the economic activity. Okay. Now it should work. Yes. So that's the summarize, and here it's the regression. So here we still have a positive impact of the years of schooling, a negative effect of gender, the stability of work in terms of whether it's temporary or permanent. The public sector has a premium, and then the premium attributed to different economic activity. Okay. Now, what if you want to include the panel structure in my data? I can add first a dummy variable that takes the value of 1 if we have 2012 as our year. So I will regress this and include a dummy variable that takes the value of 1 if the data set is of 2012. So basically, the command that we have here is regress the real hourly wage with the 2012 dummy, then the years of schooling, female, stability, public, and then the economic activities for those who are working and are wage workers. And as you can see, the coefficient is positive and statistically significant, meaning that everything else held constant, 2012 is associated to a higher wage, right? Any questions so far? Now we want to run a real panel model, because what I did so far, I was using a pooled version of the model. That's the pooled version of the panel data. So I will keep the individuals that are only in the two data sets, in the two rounds, sorry. And then I will re-estimate the model for them. And as you can see, the dummy increased from 0.7 to 0.9, which means that, and the sample decreased from 17 observation to 12,000, 17,000 to 12,000 observation. Yes, Youssef?
After the Arab Spring, wages increased.
Yes, but I mean, but we cannot really claim that the main change has been the Arab Spring, because we're really talking about 6 years change. So I think it's relatively normal to expect this increase. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, if we want to work with the panel dimension, we will have to use the xtreg command, because any panel regression starts with the xt, right? And in this case, I will have to identify first the data. So I will ask STATA to generate to use the individual ID and the round as the two dimensions that we have. So it will be the xt set also cannot rely on texts, so it has to, or it does not use string. So I have to de-string the individual ID. Okay, that's what we will do. And then we declare the data as a panel. And we can see here that the panel is balanced, right? And then we can run the random effects model, which is basically very similar to the random effects model. Sorry, the random effects model, which is very similar to the OLS model. And as I said, here the correlation is equal to 0, assumed. It's a GLS. And we have more or less the other effects that don't change a lot, but with a smaller number of observations. Okay? If we run the fixed effects, here the coefficients are significantly different. So we can see that the coefficient of 2012 has increased. The years of schooling has also changed. But what is the problem here? What do you think? If I compare, this will be the last point for today. If I compare the random effect with the fixed effect, what is the error that we have here in the model? What do you think?
Correlation between error model and exogenous variable, no?
No. Here, the first table is the regression, is the random effect regression. The second table is the fixed effects regression. And we said in the fixed effects regression, all the time invariant variables should have been dropped. Which variable did not drop?
Gender, no?
Female.
Exactly.
Yes.
Unless we have transgender, which is not very likely to happen in those sort of surveys, we should have expected that the gender variable is dropped, right? But here, female is not dropped in the fixed effects model. And probably it can be due to an error while typing the data, an error while collecting the data. So that's why we can, in this case, so as I said, it's probably a data entry error. So here we can compare those differences and see what happens if we have for the same individual a change in the gender. But in theory, we have two options: either to keep it and don't treat this, or to say that it's a data entry error. So we will remove this observation and stick to the observations that have the same gender in the two rounds. Okay. After doing this, we're going to restore the to run the regressions for, we call it store S2. So I'm going to store the results of the random effects of the fixed effects. Okay. And then I will run the Hausman test, right? And as you can see, the Hausman test here is statistically significant, 0.000, which means that we reject the null hypothesis, which means that in reality, the error term and the covariates are collinear, and therefore we cannot rely on the random effects, but we have to use the fixed effects. You will see in the rest of the do file that I will share with you how to extract those tables in Excel, either directly or through a code, because we have two options, but we don't have time to go through that. But in a nutshell, what we have seen today during these 2 days in the first part of the course, first, the importance of orthogonality and how this can affect our identification, right? And if it affects our identification, we cannot really talk about cause and effect, but we talk about associations or correlations, right? And that's why we proceeded with two approaches, one based on conditional exogeneity and the other based on the exogeneity of the instrument. The exogeneity of instrument that includes the IV and the RD and the RDD, we have seen them very quickly. However, for the conditional exogeneity of placement, we have three methods. We covered one, which is the panel, whether it's the random effects or the fixed effects, along with some applications on STATA, mainly in three main stages. First, what are the main characteristics of the Egyptian labor market panel survey and how we can use it, especially when it comes to the different weights. Second, how we can, what are some examples of commands that can be used to extract the descriptive statistics in the form of tables or in the form of graphs. And finally, running the regressions for the fixed effects and the random effects and testing the difference between them through the Hussman test. Okay. I think I tried to cover everything. I know that some points could have been developed much more, but it was very tight. I don't know if you have any questions, any comments, any queries.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so if we don't have any questions, we can stop here at this point. And next week, over the 2 days, you will have on the first day the PSM and the second day the difference in difference with Russia. On Wednesday, you will receive from Ramaj two things. You will receive first the evaluation of the training. So please make sure that you do it because this also helps us improve the content and the structure of the training. I know, for instance, one of the classical comments that we always receive is that it's very tight to cover all the themes, but it's a bit a trade-off between we know that online training can become quickly very boring, so we have to be careful also about the duration itself, but really feel free to tell us your feedback regarding the structure, the content, everything related to the training. That's one. Two, you will receive also a link to the Google Drive, where you will have all the material, the files, and you have also our emails. If you have any questions related to one of your papers or to the content that we shared with you, don't hesitate. With this, I would like to thank you very much for your active participation and for all the discussions that we had. And I want to particularly thank Namis, Ramaj, and Boulis for all their support. And we can stop here, and I wish you a nice evening. Thank you all.